The winter storm rolled across the Montana Territory with a vengeance that February evening in 1878, and Victoria Eleanor stood outside the Caldwell Hotel with one hand pressed against her swollen belly and the other clutching her worn carpetbag, listening to the proprietor tell her there was no room available even though she could see lamplight burning in at least 3 upstairs windows. The snow fell thick and fast around her shoulders, soaking through the thin wool of her traveling cloak, and she felt the baby inside her shift and kick, as if protesting the cold that seeped through to her bones. "Please," she said, trying to keep her voice steady even as her teeth wanted to chatter. "I have money. I can pay whatever you ask. I just need somewhere warm to sleep tonight." The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles perched on his narrow nose, looked her up and down with obvious distaste. His gaze lingered on her left hand, bare of any wedding ring, and his mouth pressed into a disapproving line. "I run a respectable establishment, miss. We do not cater to women in your particular situation. You would be better served seeking charity from the church, though Reverend Matthews has already retired for the evening." The door shut firmly in her face before she could form another plea, and Victoria stood there in the gathering darkness, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. She had been traveling for nearly 3 weeks, ever since her aunt in Denver had made it clear that Victoria was no longer welcome under her roof, not with the shame of an illegitimate child growing larger every day. The baby's father had disappeared the moment she told him about her condition, taking with him all her foolish dreams of marriage and respectability. Now she was headed north to Missoula, where a distant cousin had grudgingly agreed to take her in, at least until the baby was born. But Missoula was still 2 days away by stagecoach, and the storm had forced an early stop in Caldwell. She turned away from the hotel, her vision blurring with tears that she refused to let fall, and looked up and down the main street of the small town. Most of the buildings were already dark, their shutters closed against the storm. The general store was locked up tight. The saloon at the far end of the street glowed with warm light and rang with the sounds of rough laughter, but Victoria knew better than to seek shelter there. A woman alone, especially in her condition, would find nothing but trouble in such a place. The wind picked up, howling down from the mountains that surrounded the town, and Victoria pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. She had perhaps $20 left to her name, carefully hoarded against emergencies, but money meant nothing if there was nowhere to spend it. The stagecoach office would not open again until morning, and the driver who had brought her here had already continued on with the other passengers, leaving her behind when she said she needed to rest. She was just beginning to wonder if she might have to spend the night huddled in the covered stagecoach station, praying the wind would not blow the snow through the open sides, when she heard the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the snow behind her. Victoria turned, her heart suddenly pounding with a fear born of months of vulnerability, and found herself looking up at the largest man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the lamplight from the hotel windows behind him. He wore a heavy fur coat that made him look even more massive, and his dark hair hung past his shoulders, shot through with melting snowflakes that glittered in the dim light. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, and his eyes, even in the shadows, were a striking pale blue that seemed to see right through her carefully maintained composure. "You need a place to stay," he said, and it was not a question. His voice was deep and rough, as if he did not use it often, and carried the faint trace of an accent she could not quite place. Scandinavian, perhaps, or somewhere else far to the north. Victoria lifted her chin, trying to maintain some dignity even as the snow continued to soak through her clothes. "The hotel has no rooms available," she said carefully, not wanting to admit just how desperate her situation had become. The man made a sound that might have been disgust or anger, she could not tell which. "That is a lie. I heard what the proprietor said to you. I was in the lobby, checking in when he turned you away." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had gentled slightly, though it still rumbled like distant thunder. "He refused you because of the child you carry." Heat flooded Victoria's face despite the cold, and she felt shame twist in her stomach. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she was not the loose woman the proprietor clearly thought her to be, that she had believed the man who promised to marry her, that she had been foolish and trusting and naive. But the words stuck in her throat, and all she could do was nod silently. "I have a room," the man said abruptly. "2 beds, you can have it. I will sleep in the livery stable with my horse." Victoria's eyes widened. "I could not possibly accept such an offer." "You do not even know me, and you are with child and you need shelter from the storm," the man interrupted, his tone making it clear he saw the situation as simple and uncomplicated. "I am Vaughn Voss. I live in the mountains west of here, and I am accustomed to sleeping rough. 1 night in a stable is nothing to me, but a pregnant woman should not spend the night in the cold." He held out one massive hand, and Victoria found herself staring at the calluses and scars that spoke of hard physical labor, at the surprising gentleness with which he waited for her decision. Everything in her upbringing told her that accepting such an offer from a strange man was improper, possibly dangerous. But the alternative was spending the night freezing in the stagecoach station, and she could feel the baby moving restlessly inside her, as if it too was protesting the cold. "Victoria Eleanor," she heard herself say as she placed her much smaller hand in his, "and I will pay you for the room." Vaughn's large hand closed around hers with surprising care, and he shook his head. "No payment. Come before you freeze standing here in the street." He picked up her carpet bag, as if it weighed nothing, and led her back toward the hotel entrance. When the proprietor looked up from his ledger and saw Victoria walking in beside Vaughn, his face flushed an angry red. "Now see here, Mr. Voss. I told that woman we have no rooms for her sort, and I will not have her. The room is mine," Vaughn said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge of steel that made the proprietor fall silent mid-sentence. "I paid for it. I can give it to whomever I choose. The lady will be staying there tonight. I will be in the stable if you need to find me." He placed a large brass key on the desk and pushed it toward Victoria. "Room 7, top of the stairs and to the left. There is a lock on the door. Use it." He set her carpet bag down beside the desk and turned toward the door, then paused and looked back at the proprietor. "See that she gets hot water for washing and send up a tray with dinner. Whatever the kitchen has prepared, put it on my bill." The proprietor sputtered something about not running a charity, but Vaughn was already walking out into the storm, his broad shoulders disappearing into the swirling snow before Victoria could even properly thank him. She stood there staring after him, one hand pressed against her belly, trying to understand what had just happened. A complete stranger had given up his warm room and his comfortable bed to sleep in a stable, simply because she needed help. In her experience, men did not do such things without expecting something in return. "Well," the proprietor said sourly, breaking into her thoughts, "I suppose you had better go up before Mr. Voss changes his mind, though I want it known that I do not approve of this arrangement, not one bit." Victoria picked up her carpet bag and her key, her hands trembling slightly with exhaustion and relief. "Your approval was not requested," she said quietly, then climbed the stairs before the man could respond. Room 7 was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds covered in quilts, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small stove in the corner that was already burning with a low fire. Victoria set down her bag and sank onto the nearest bed, feeling the ache in her back and legs that had been building all day. The baby kicked again, a rolling movement that pressed against her ribs, and she placed both hands on her belly, taking a slow, shaky breath. "We are safe," she whispered to the child growing inside her. "At least for tonight, we are safe and warm." A knock at the door made her tense, but it was only a young girl, probably the proprietor's daughter, carrying a pitcher of steaming water and a tray covered with a cloth. The girl set them both down without meeting Victoria's eyes, and left quickly, as if afraid that whatever moral failing Victoria possessed might be contagious. Under the cloth, Victoria found thick slices of roasted beef, boiled potatoes with butter, green beans, and 2 pieces of apple pie. It was more food than she had seen in weeks, and her stomach growled in response. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, then washed her face and hands with the hot water before changing into her nightgown and crawling between the clean sheets. She should have fallen asleep immediately, exhausted as she was, but instead she found herself thinking about the mountain man who had given her this room. Vaughn Voss. She tried to picture him sleeping in the cold stable, wrapped in his fur coat, and felt guilt twist in her chest. She had his bed, his dinner, his warmth, and she had not even been able to properly thank him. The storm raged outside the window, and Victoria listened to the wind howl around the eaves of the hotel. She thought about what might have happened to her if Vaughn had not appeared when he did. Would she have tried to weather the night in the stage-coach station? Would she have risked entering the saloon, hoping to find some shred of human kindness among the rough men inside? Or would she have simply huddled in some doorway and prayed that the cold did not kill her and her unborn child? She fell asleep with her hands still resting on her belly, and dreamed of pale blue eyes and a voice like distant thunder. Morning came gray and cold, the storm having passed in the night but leaving behind at least a foot of fresh snow that blanketed the town. Victoria woke to find that someone had stoked the fire in the stove while she slept, keeping the room warm through the night. She dressed quickly, braiding her long dark hair and pinning it up, then made her way downstairs to find the dining room serving breakfast. Vaughn was not there, and when she asked the proprietor if he had seen the mountain man, she received only a curt shake of the head. Victoria ate a small breakfast of eggs and toast, all the while wondering if Vaughn had already left town, if she would ever see him again to offer her thanks. The thought bothered her more than it should have, considering she had known the man for all of 10 minutes. After breakfast, she made her way to the livery stable, walking carefully through the snow that came up past her ankles. The stable was a large building at the edge of town, and when she pushed open the door, she was greeted by the warm smell of horses and hay. A young stable hand looked up from where he was mucking out a stall, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Help you, miss?" "I am looking for Mr. Voss," Victoria said. "Vaughn Voss. I was told he spent the night here." The boy pointed toward the back of the stable. "He is back there with his horse. Big gray stallion, cannot miss it." Victoria made her way down the center aisle, past stalls filled with horses of various sizes and colors, until she reached the last stall and found Vaughn brushing down the biggest horse she had ever seen. The stallion was indeed gray, nearly white in some places, with a dark mane and tail and intelligent eyes that watched her approach with interest. Vaughn stood beside the horse, running a brush in long, steady strokes down the animal's flank, and even in the dim light of the stable, Victoria could see the sheer size and strength of the man. He wore no coat this morning, just a heavy wool shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders and muscular arms, and his long dark hair was tied back with a leather cord. When he looked up and saw her standing there, something flickered in his pale blue eyes, too quick for her to read. "Miss Eleanor," he said, nodding slightly in greeting. "I trust you slept well, better than I have in weeks," Victoria admitted. "Thanks to your kindness, Mr. Voss, I want to thank you properly for what you did. You gave up your room, your comfort, so that a stranger might have shelter. I do not know many men who would have done such a thing." Vaughn turned back to his horse, continuing to brush the animal's coat with steady, even strokes. "Any decent man would have done the same. You needed help, and I was able to give it. There is nothing more to it than that." "There is a great deal more to it than that," Victoria insisted, moving closer to the stall. The gray stallion turned his head to look at her, and she reached out tentatively to stroke his soft nose. "You slept in a stable in the middle of winter. You paid for my dinner. You asked nothing in return." "What would I ask?" Vaughn said, and there was something almost puzzled in his tone, as if he genuinely did not understand why she thought he might have ulterior motives. "You are with child and alone. Only a cruel man would demand payment for offering basic human kindness." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had spent so many months surrounded by people who judged her, who saw only her shame and her sin, that Vaughn's matter-of-fact acceptance of her situation felt like a balm on a wound she had not realized was still bleeding. "Not everyone sees it that way," she said quietly. The hotel proprietor made his feelings quite clear. Vaughn made that same sound of disgust she had heard the night before. "The hotel proprietor is a small-minded fool. How you came to be with child is your business, not his, and certainly not mine. All I saw was a woman who needed help." He set down the brush and turned to face her fully, and Victoria found herself tilting her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, in the daylight, she could see that his face was younger than she had initially thought. He could not be much older than 30, though the weathered tan of his skin and the hard planes of his features made him seem more seasoned. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, a thin white line that stood out against his tanned skin, and another along his jaw. "Where are you traveling to?" he asked. "Miss Ola," Victoria said. "I have family there, a cousin who has agreed to take me in, at least until after the baby is born." "And after?" Victoria looked away, focusing on the horse rather than on those two perceptive blue eyes. "I do not know. I will find work somewhere, I suppose. I was a school teacher before this. Perhaps I can find another position once the baby is old enough to be left with someone." "You were a teacher," Vaughn said, "and it was not a question. That is why you speak the way you do, proper." Despite everything, Victoria felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Yes, my mother was very insistent that I receive a good education. She wanted me to have opportunities she never had." The smile faded. "She died 3 years ago. She never knew about any of this." "Perhaps that is a mercy," Vaughn said gently. "The dead do not suffer the worries of the living." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sounds the gentle huffing of the horses and the rustle of hay. Finally, Vaughn spoke again. "The stage-coach north will not run for at least 2 more days. The pass is snowed in and they will need to wait for the road to be cleared. You can keep the hotel room until then. I will find somewhere else to stay." "I will not put you out again," Victoria protested. "You have already done more than enough. You can stay in the room," Vaughn said firmly. "I have business in town that will keep me occupied, and I am perfectly comfortable in the stable. It is settled." He picked up a saddle from where it rested on the stall rail and swung it onto the stallion's back with easy strength, buckling the straps with practiced efficiency. Victoria watched him work, noting the way his hands moved with competent sureness, the way the horse stood calmly under his touch, clearly trusting him completely. "May I ask what brings you to Caldwell?" she ventured. "You said you live in the mountains." "I trap," Vaughn said. "Beaver, mostly, some fox and marten. I come to town 3 or 4 times a year to sell my pelts and buy supplies. Then I return to the mountains." "That sounds like a lonely life." Vaughn glanced at her, one corner of his mouth quirking up slightly. "It suits me. I am not much for crowds and conversation. The mountains are quiet, peaceful." "And isolated," Victoria said softly. "That too," Vaughn agreed. He led the stallion out of the stall and toward the stable doors. "I need to take care of some business at the trading post." "Will you be all right finding your way back to the hotel?" "Of course," Victoria said, though she felt an odd reluctance to leave his company. There was something comforting about Vaughn's quiet presence, a steadiness that made her feel safer than she had in months. "Thank you again, Mr. Voss." "For everything." He nodded, then swung up into the saddle with a fluid grace that belied his size. "Vaughn," he said, looking down at her. "You can call me Vaughn. Mr. Voss sounds too formal for people who have shared a room, even if we were not both present at the same time." Victoria felt herself blush at the gentle teasing in his tone. "Then you must call me Victoria." "Victoria," he repeated, and something about the way he said her name in that deep, rough voice made warmth bloom in her chest. He touched the brim of his hat in a farewell gesture, then rode out into the snowy morning. Victoria walked back to the hotel slowly, her mind full of thoughts she could not quite sort through. She spent the rest of the day in her room, sewing small garments for the baby from fabric she had brought with her, and trying not to think about how empty the town felt now that she knew Vaughn was somewhere out there, conducting his business. That evening, when she came down for dinner, she found Vaughn sitting alone at a corner table in the dining room, a plate of stew and cornbread in front of him. He looked up when she entered and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Join me," he said, "unless you prefer to eat alone." Victoria hesitated only a moment before crossing the room and taking the offered seat. The proprietor brought her the same meal Vaughn was eating, his disapproval clear in every stiff movement, but Victoria ignored him. She was tired of caring what narrow-minded people thought of her. They ate in companionable silence for a while, and Victoria found herself studying Vaughn when she thought he was not looking. His hands, large and scarred, handled the spoon and bread with surprising delicacy. He ate slowly, methodically, like a man who was used to making his food last. When he caught her watching him, he raised one dark eyebrow in question. "I was just wondering," Victoria said, deciding honesty was the best approach, "how you came to live alone in the mountains. You speak English well, but your accent suggests you were not born in this country." "I was born in Norway," Vaughn said, "a small village on the coast. My family came to America when I was 12 years old. We settled in Minnesota first, farming country. But my parents both died of fever when I was 17, and my sister married and moved east. I had no reason to stay, so I came west, looking for something I could not name." "And did you find it?" Vaughn considered this, his pale blue eyes distant. "I found peace, solitude, a place where I could be useful without having to be what other people expected me to be. In the mountains, it does not matter if I am good at making small talk or attending church socials. All that matters is whether I can survive the winter and provide for myself. It is a simple life, but it is mine." "You never get lonely, sometimes," Vaughn admitted. "But lonely is different from alone. I like being alone. It is the loneliness that is harder, but I have my horse and my traps and the mountain itself for company. It is enough, most of the time." Victoria nodded slowly, understanding more than he perhaps realized. She had been surrounded by people for months, living in her aunt's boarding house in Denver, and yet she had never felt more alone in her life. The judgment and the whispers and the cold shoulders had isolated her more thoroughly than any mountain wilderness could have. "What about you?" Vaughn asked, turning the conversation back to her. "How did you come to be traveling alone in your condition?" Victoria looked down at her plate, choosing her words carefully. "I was engaged to be married, or so I thought. He was a lawyer, new to Denver, very charming and handsome. He said all the right things, made all the right promises, and I believed him." She took a breath, forcing herself to continue. "When I told him about the baby, he disappeared, left town in the middle of the night without a word. My aunt, who had taken me in after my mother died, told me I had brought shame on the family and that I could not stay. So I wrote to my cousin in Missoula, and she agreed to take me in, though I know she is not happy about it. But she is family, and family has obligations." "This lawyer," Vaughn said, and his voice had gone very quiet, very cold. "Does he know where you are going?" "No," Victoria said. "And I do not want him to know. I want nothing from him. This baby is mine, and I will raise it myself." Vaughn nodded, something that looked like approval in his eyes. "You are brave, braver than you probably realize. It takes strength to face the world when everyone has turned against you." "I do not feel very brave," Victoria admitted. "Most days I just feel tired and scared." "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Vaughn said. "It is moving forward despite the fear. You are doing that. You are protecting your child and building a future even when the path is hard. That is the very definition of brave." His words settled over her like a warm blanket, and Victoria felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of anxiety that she had been carrying for months. This man, this near stranger, saw her not as a fallen woman or a source of shame, but as a person worthy of respect. It was a gift she had not known she needed so desperately. They talked through the rest of dinner, the conversation flowing more easily than Victoria would have thought possible. Vaughn told her about life in the mountains, about tracking animals through fresh snow, and the brutal beauty of winter storms seen from a cabin high above the tree line. Victoria told him about her years as a teacher, about the students she had loved, and the satisfaction of watching children learn to read. It was only when the proprietor began pointedly clearing tables around them that they realized how late it had gotten. "I should let you rest," Vaughn said, rising from his chair. "You need your sleep for you and the baby." Victoria stood as well, though more slowly, her back aching from sitting so long. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "If you wish," Vaughn said, and there was something almost hopeful in his expression. "I will be in town for at least another day, waiting for the stage-coach roads to clear." "I wish," Victoria said softly, and was rewarded with a small smile that transformed Vaughn's usually serious face. She climbed the stairs to her room feeling lighter than she had in months, and when she lay down to sleep, she found herself thinking not about her uncertain future, but about pale blue eyes and a gentle voice that spoke of mountains and solitude. The next day dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue overhead. Victoria woke to find that someone had again tended the fire in her stove, and when she went down to breakfast, she spotted Vaughn through the dining room window, splitting firewood behind the hotel with powerful, rhythmic swings of an axe. She watched him for a moment, mesmerized by the sheer strength he displayed, the way the muscles in his shoulders and back flexed with each swing, the ease with which he handled the heavy axe. After breakfast, she bundled herself into her cloak and ventured outside, finding Vaughn stacking the split wood in neat cords against the side of the building. "You do not have to do this," she said, approaching him. "You are a paying guest, not a laborer." Vaughn shrugged, setting another piece of wood on the chopping block. The proprietor mentioned he needed wood split. I was willing to do it in exchange for the use of the stable. It is a fair trade. Still, Victoria said, it seems like you are doing all the giving and getting very little in return. Vaughn paused, the axe resting against his shoulder, and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. I have a warm place to sleep and good food, and company that I enjoy. I would say I am getting quite a lot in return. Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Would you like some company while you work? I have nothing pressing to do today, and I find I prefer conversation to sitting alone in my room. I would like that, Vaughn said simply, and went back to splitting wood. Victoria settled herself on a nearby bench that someone had cleared of snow, and they talked as Vaughn worked. She learned that he had built his cabin with his own hands, hauling logs down from higher up the mountain and cutting them to size. He told her about the first winter he had spent there, how he had nearly starved because he had not properly calculated how much food he would need to last until spring. He had learned from that mistake, he said, and now he kept a well-stocked pantry and several months' worth of dried and smoked meat. In turn, Victoria told him about her childhood, about growing up in a small town in Kansas where her mother had worked as a seamstress. She spoke of her decision to become a teacher, of the satisfaction she had found in helping children discover the world through books. She even, hesitantly, told him a little more about the man who had fathered her child, about how charming he had seemed, how convincing his lies had been. He was good at making people believe what he wanted them to believe, she said quietly, watching Vaughn set up another piece of wood. I was not the first woman he deceived, I discovered later, just the first one foolish enough to believe his promises of marriage. Vaughn brought the axe down with particular force, splitting the wood cleanly in two. He is a coward and a liar. You did nothing wrong by believing a man you thought loved you. Society does not see it that way. Society is often wrong, Vaughn said flatly. He set the axe aside and came to sit beside her on the bench, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body after the exertion of chopping wood. You trusted someone who was not worthy of your trust. That speaks to your open heart, not to any failing on your part. My open heart has caused me nothing but trouble, Victoria said, trying for lightness but hearing the bitterness creep into her voice anyway. Your open heart is what makes you kind and compassionate and willing to see the good in people, Vaughn countered. That is not a failing, Victoria. That is a strength, even if the world has not shown you much kindness in return. She turned to look at him, at this massive, quiet man who spoke with such certainty about things she had begun to doubt. How can you be so sure? You barely know me. I know enough, Vaughn said. I know you are brave and strong. I know you are trying to build a life for your child in the face of great difficulty. I know you speak with gentleness and treat others with respect, even those who have shown you none in return. These things tell me who you are, Victoria Eleanor. His words wrapped around her heart like a warm embrace, and Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for not judging me, for treating me like I am still a person worthy of respect. You are, Vaughn said simply. You always have been. They sat together in the winter sunshine, not touching but somehow connected, and Victoria felt something shift inside her. It was too soon, she told herself. She barely knew this man. She had already made one terrible mistake with her heart, and she could not afford to make another. But despite all her logical arguments, she could not deny the pull she felt toward Vaughn Voss, the sense of safety and acceptance that surrounded him like a physical presence. That afternoon, Vaughn took her on a walk through the town, pointing out the few landmarks Caldwell had to offer. They visited the general store, where the proprietor's wife was much friendlier than her husband, cooing over Victoria's condition and offering advice about preparing for the baby. They stopped by the church, a small white building with a tall steeple, and Vaughn told her about the minister who served the community, a kind man who held services every Sunday and never turned away anyone in need. As they walked, Victoria became aware of the looks they were receiving from the townspeople. Some were merely curious, but others held disapproval, judgment. She knew what they were thinking, what conclusions they were drawing about a pregnant woman traveling with a mountain man who was clearly not her husband. Vaughn must have noticed her discomfort, because he moved closer, his presence a solid wall of protection between her and the staring eyes. "Let them think what they will," he said quietly. "Their opinions mean nothing." "They mean something to me," Victoria admitted. "I am tired of being judged, of being found wanting. I just want to live my life without everyone assuming the worst of me." "Then hold your head high and show them they are wrong," Vaughn said. "You have done nothing to be ashamed of. You loved unwisely, perhaps, but love is never shameful. And you are protecting your child and building a future. That takes courage. Let them see that courage." Victoria straightened her spine and lifted her chin, drawing strength from Vaughn's steady presence beside her. They finished their walk through town with her looking directly at anyone who stared, meeting their eyes with calm dignity. It was exhausting, but also strangely empowering. That evening they ate dinner together again, and afterward Vaughn walked her to her room, carrying a fresh bucket of coal for her stove. He set it down beside the small heater and turned to face her, his expression serious. "The roads should be clear by tomorrow," he said. "The stagecoach will be running again the day after. You will be able to continue your journey to Missoula." Victoria's heart sank at the thought of leaving, though she knew it was foolish to feel that way. She had known from the beginning that this was temporary, that she and Vaughn were merely two people whose paths had crossed briefly in the midst of winter. Still, the thought of never seeing him again left her feeling hollow. "Yes," she said, keeping her voice even. "I suppose I will need to purchase a ticket in the morning." Vaughn was quiet for a moment, his pale blue eyes searching her face. "Victoria," he said slowly, as if choosing his words with great care. "These past few days, talking with you, spending time with you, it has meant more to me than I can properly express. I'm not good with words. I am better with actions, with doing rather than saying. But I want you to know that meeting you has been important to me." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. "It has been important to me as well," she whispered. "You have shown me kindness when I desperately needed it. You have made me feel like I am still worth something, still deserving of respect and care. I will not forget that, Vaughn. I will not forget you." He took a step closer, and Victoria's heart began to race. He was so large, so imposing, and yet she felt no fear. Only a warmth that spread through her entire body, a longing for something she could not quite name. "May I write to you?" Vaughn asked. "When you are settled in Missoula, may I send you letters?" "Yes," Victoria said immediately. "Please. I would like that very much." "And if I came to Missoula," Vaughn continued, his voice rougher now, "to visit, to see how you are doing, would that be welcome?" "Very welcome," Victoria breathed. Vaughn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and gently cupped her face with one large, calloused hand. His touch was surprisingly tender, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite care. "I am going to kiss you now," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "If you do not want me to, tell me to stop." Victoria could not have told him to stop if her life depended on it. She swayed closer, her eyes fluttering closed, and felt his lips touch hers with a gentleness that made her want to weep. It was nothing like the aggressive, demanding kisses she had received from the man who had fathered her child. This was soft and sweet and full of a respect that made her feel cherished rather than claimed. When Vaughn pulled back, Victoria opened her eyes to find him watching her with an expression of such tenderness that it made her heart ache. "I should go," he said quietly, though he made no move to leave. "Before I do something foolish like ask you not to get on that stagecoach at all." "What if I do not want to get on the stagecoach?" Victoria heard herself say. "What if I would rather stay here with you?" Vaughn's hand tightened slightly against her face. "Do not say such things unless you mean them, Victoria. I am a simple man, and I do not know how to play games with hearts." "I am not playing a game," Victoria said, and realized with sudden clarity that she meant it. "I know we have only known each other for a few days. I know this is fast, probably foolish. But Vaughn, when I am with you, I feel safe. I feel valued. I feel like maybe my life is not over just because I made one terrible mistake." "Your life is not over," Vaughn said fiercely. "It is just beginning. You have a child coming, and that child will be lucky to have you as a mother. But Victoria, I live in a cabin in the mountains. It is isolated and rough, and the winters are brutal. It is no place for a woman about to give birth." "But after," Victoria said, her hands coming up to grip his wrist, keeping his hand against her face. "After the baby is born and I have recovered, could it be a place for me then, for us?" She saw hope flare in Vaughn's eyes, bright and fierce. "You would truly consider such a thing? Leaving civilization behind to live with a mountain man you barely know?" "I would consider it," Victoria said. "More than consider it. Vaughn, I have nothing waiting for me in Missoula except a cousin who agreed to take me in out of obligation, not love. I have no real future there, no prospects, no hope of building the kind of life I want. But when I look at you when I am with you, I see possibilities I had not dared to imagine." Vaughn bent his head, pressing his forehead against hers, and Victoria felt him trembling slightly. "I want you to stay," he whispered. "I want you to come to the mountains with me to build a life together, but I will not ask you to make such a decision in haste. You will go to Missoula as planned. You will have your baby. You will recover and take time to think about what you truly want. And if, after all that, you still feel the same way, I will come for you. I will bring you to the mountains, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Victoria pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "I will not change my mind." "Perhaps not," Vaughn said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But I will feel better knowing you had time to consider all your options. I will not be the man who rushed you into another decision you might regret." Victoria wanted to argue, to insist that this was different, that what she felt for Vaughn was nothing like what she had felt for the lawyer who had abandoned her. But she could see the determination in Vaughn's face, and she knew he would not be swayed. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps she did need time to be certain. "Then write to me," she said. "Write to me often, so I do not forget the sound of your voice or the kindness in your eyes." "I will write," Vaughn promised. "And I will come to Missoula in the spring after the mountain passes are clear. We will see where we stand then." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, and Victoria felt the promise in it, the commitment. When he finally left, slipping out into the hallway and closing the door quietly behind him, Victoria stood in the center of the room with her fingers pressed against her lips, marveling at the sudden turn her life had taken. She had come to Caldwell expecting nothing more than a brief rest before continuing her journey into an uncertain future. Instead, she had found a man who looked at her with respect and care, who offered her not pity but partnership, who saw her not as a fallen woman but as someone worthy of love. The next morning, Victoria purchased her ticket for the stagecoach to Missoula, scheduled to depart the following day. She spent her last afternoon in Caldwell with Vaughn, walking along the snowy paths at the edge of town, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his plans for expanding his trap lines in the spring, about improvements he wanted to make to his cabin. She told him about her hopes for her child, about the kind of life she wanted to provide. "What will you tell your child about its father?" Vaughn asked at one point, his voice careful. Victoria considered this. "The truth," she said finally. "When the time comes when my child is old enough to understand, I will tell the truth. That I loved someone who did not love me in return, and that I do not regret the child that came from that love, even if I regret the man himself. And if I am part of your life," Vaughn said slowly, "if we build a future together, how would you want the child to see me?" Victoria stopped walking and turned to face him, taking his large hands in her smaller ones. "I would want my child to see you exactly as you are, strong and kind and brave. I would want my child to know that you chose to be a father when you did not have to be, that you offered love and protection when the child's own father could not be bothered. I would want my child to call you father and mean it." She saw Vaughn swallow hard, his eyes bright with emotion. "I would be honored," he said roughly. "I would be so very honored." They stood there in the snow, hands clasped, and Victoria felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blessing. This was what she had been seeking without knowing it. Not a man who offered pretty words and empty promises, but one who showed his care through actions, who asked for nothing but gave everything. The morning of Victoria's departure arrived too quickly. She stood in front of the hotel with her carpetbag in hand, watching as the stagecoach driver loaded luggage and checked the horses. Vaughn stood beside her, his gray stallion saddled and ready, his own supplies packed. He would be heading back into the mountains as soon as the stagecoach left, returning to his solitary life. "Spring," he said, looking down at her. "I will come in spring as soon as the pass is clear. That will give you time to have the baby and recover. Time to be certain this is what you want." "I am already certain," Victoria said, but she smiled to soften the stubborn set of her words. "But I understand, and I will wait for you, Vaughn Voss. I will wait however long it takes." He pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly, and held her close. Victoria pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke and something uniquely Vaughn. She wanted to memorize this moment, to carry it with her through the long months ahead. "Write to me," she whispered against his chest. "Tell me about the mountains and the snow and the animals you trap. Tell me about your life so I can imagine myself being part of it." "I will write every week," Vaughn promised. "And you must write back. Tell me about the baby. Tell me if you need anything. I may be in the mountains, but I can send money, supplies, whatever you need." "I just need to know you are thinking of me," Victoria said. "That is all." The stagecoach driver called out that it was time to board, and Victoria reluctantly pulled away from Vaughn's embrace. He walked her to the coach and helped her up the steps with gentle hands, then stood back as the driver climbed to his seat and took up the reins. As the coach began to roll forward, Victoria pressed her face to the window, watching as Vaughn mounted his stallion. He sat there in the street, his hand raised in farewell, and Victoria raised her own hand in response. She watched until the coach turned a corner and he disappeared from view, then sat back against the seat and placed her hands on her belly. "We are going to be all right," she whispered to the baby inside her. "We are going to build a good life, you and I, and maybe, if we are very fortunate, we will not be doing it alone." The journey to Missoula took 3 days, with stops at small towns and way stations along the route. Victoria spent the hours alternating between excitement about seeing Vaughn again and worry about the months that lay ahead. Her cousin Agnes had agreed to take her in, but Victoria knew it was not a warm welcome that awaited her. Agnes had made it clear in her letters that she disapproved of Victoria's situation. and that she was providing shelter only because family obligations demanded it. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Missoula, Victoria gathered her bag and stepped down into the muddy street, looking around at the bustling town. It was larger than Caldwell, with more buildings and more people, and for a moment she felt overwhelmed by the noise and activity. "Victoria." A sharp voice called, and Victoria turned to see a thin woman in a severe black dress approaching. Agnes looked much like Victoria remembered, though her face had grown harder in the years since they had last seen each other. "Well, you certainly are in a state. Come along, then." "My house is just up the street." Agnes did not offer to help with the bag, so Victoria carried it herself, following her cousin through the streets to a small, neat house on the edge of town. Inside, everything was clean and orderly and utterly devoid of warmth. Agnes showed her to a small room at the back of the house, barely large enough for the narrow bed and small dresser it contained. "You will help with the housework to earn your keep," Agnes said briskly, "and you will be discreet about your condition. I have a reputation in this town, and I will not have it tarnished by your poor choices." Victoria bit back the angry retort that rose to her lips and simply nodded. "Thank you for taking me in, Agnes. I appreciate your generosity." Agnes sniffed. "It is no more than duty demands. Supper is at 6. Do not be late." The first weeks in Missoula were difficult. Agnes was cold and critical, finding fault with everything Victoria did. The other women in town, taking their cue from Agnes, treated Victoria with barely concealed disdain. She spent her days helping with the washing and cooking and cleaning, and her evenings alone in her small room, writing letters to Vaughn by candlelight. His letters began arriving 2 weeks after her arrival, forwarded from the general store in Caldwell, where he picked up his own mail. Victoria treasured each one, reading them over and over until the paper grew soft from handling. Vaughn wrote about the mountains, about tracking a pack of wolves through fresh snow, about repairing a section of his cabin roof before the next storm. He wrote about missing her, about thinking of her when he saw the sunset paint the snow pink and gold. His words were simple and honest, and they kept her going through the long, lonely weeks. Victoria wrote back faithfully, telling him about the baby's increasingly vigorous movements, about the strange cravings she had developed for pickles and maple sugar. She told him about Agnes's coldness and the town's judgment, but also about the beautiful view of the mountains from her bedroom window, about the books she had borrowed from the town library to pass the time. As winter turned to spring, Victoria's belly grew larger and her movements became more awkward. Agnes hired a midwife to attend the birth, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who was one of the few people in town who treated Victoria with genuine kindness. "Never you mind what the gossips say," Mrs. Henderson told Victoria during one of her visits. "You are bringing a new life into the world, and that is a blessing, no matter the circumstances. You focus on staying healthy and strong and let God sort out the rest." The baby came on a warm April evening, after 12 hours of hard labor that left Victoria exhausted but exhilarated. When Mrs. Henderson placed the tiny, squalling infant in her arms, Victoria looked down at her daughter's red face and felt a rush of love so fierce it took her breath away. "She is perfect," Victoria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She is absolutely perfect." "Have you chosen a name?" Mrs. Henderson asked, cleaning up while Agnes hovered in the doorway, looking uncomfortable with the whole proceeding. "Violet," Victoria said, touching her daughter's tiny hand and marveling when the baby's fingers wrapped around her own. "Violet Rose." Agnes made a disapproving sound. "Rose was your mother's name." "I am not sure it is appropriate to." "It is my daughter," Victoria interrupted, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. I will name her as I see fit." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Victoria fell into the rhythm of new motherhood with a determination born of love and necessity. Violet was a healthy, hungry baby who seemed to grow larger every day, and Victoria found joy in every small milestone, every new sound or expression. She wrote to Vaughn about everything, describing their daughter in such detail that she hoped he would feel as though he knew her already. His letters in return were full of wonder and longing, and he wrote that he was counting the days until he could meet both Victoria and Violet. "The passes are almost clear," he wrote in late April. "Another week or two and I will be able to make the journey to Missoula. I have been preparing for this all winter, building furniture for the cabin, making it ready for you and the baby if you still wish to come. My heart beats faster every time I think of seeing you again, of holding our daughter for the first time." Victoria clutched that letter to her chest and allowed herself to imagine the future Vaughn was offering. A cabin in the mountains, far from judging eyes and wagging tongues. A life built on honesty and hard work and genuine affection. A father for Violet who would choose to love her, who would protect and cherish her. It seemed almost too good to be true, and yet Victoria knew in her bones that Vaughn would keep his promises. He was not the kind of man who spoke words he did not mean. The morning Vaughn arrived in Missoula, Victoria was hanging laundry in the small yard behind Agnes's house, with Violet sleeping in a basket at her feet. She heard the sound of a horse approaching and looked up to see a familiar gray stallion coming up the alley. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she dropped the sheet she had been hanging to run toward him. Vaughn swung down from the saddle and caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet despite her protests that she was too heavy now, that she had not yet lost all the weight from the pregnancy. He held her close, his face buried in her hair, and she felt him trembling. "I have missed you," he said roughly. "Every single day I have missed you." "I have missed you too," Victoria whispered. "So much." He set her down gently and looked past her to where Violet was beginning to fuss in her basket. "Is that our daughter?" Victoria said, taking his hand and leading him to the basket. "Vaughn, meet Violet Rose." Vaughn dropped to his knees beside the basket, staring down at the tiny baby with an expression of such awe that Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Violet, perhaps sensing the attention, opened her eyes and looked up at the huge man looming over her. For a moment they simply stared at each other, and then Violet yawned, showing pink gums, and made a small cooing sound. "May I hold her?" Vaughn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Victoria said, bending to pick up the baby. She placed Violet carefully in Vaughn's large arms, showing him how to support her head, and watched as he cradled the infant against his broad chest with infinite tenderness. "Hello, little one," Vaughn murmured, running one finger gently down Violet's soft cheek. "I am Vaughn. I am going to be your papa if your mama will have me." Violet grabbed onto his finger with a surprisingly strong grip, and Vaughn laughed, the sound full of delight. Victoria watched them together, this mountain man and this tiny baby, and knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. "Victoria," Agnes's sharp voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Who is this man? What is he doing here?" Victoria straightened, turning to face her cousin with her chin held high. "This is Vaughn Voss, the man I am going to marry." Agnes's eyes widened in shock. "Mary, you cannot be serious, you know nothing about him." "And you with a bastard child do not," Vaughn said quietly, but with such cold authority that Agnes fell silent mid-sentence. He stood, still cradling Violet, and looked at Agnes with ice in his pale blue eyes. "Do not ever speak of this child that way again. She is innocent and deserves only love and respect. And Victoria is a good, honorable woman who made one mistake in trusting the wrong man. She will not be judged or shamed, not by you or anyone else." Agnes sputtered, her face turning red. "How dare you speak to me that way in my own home?" "Victoria, if you leave with this man, you will not be welcome back." "I will not, then I will not come back," Victoria said calmly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders as she spoke the words. "Thank you for providing shelter when I needed it, Agnes. But I am done living in a place where I am made to feel like a burden and a source of shame. I am going to build a life with a man who loves me and accepts my daughter. I am going to be happy." She went inside and packed her few belongings quickly, while Vaughn waited outside with Violet. Agnes followed her around the house, alternating between angry lectures about propriety and warnings about the dangers of trusting strange men. Victoria ignored her, focusing on gathering the baby's things and the letters Vaughn had sent her over the past months. When she emerged from the house with her carpetbag and Violet's basket, Vaughn was waiting with his stallion and a second horse, a gentle mare, that he must have purchased that morning. "I thought you would need your own mount," he said. "She is calm and steady, good for riding with a baby." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you." Vaughn helped her mount the mare, then fashioned a sling from a blanket so she could carry Violet against her chest while riding. When everything was secured, he swung onto his own horse and looked at her with a question in his eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked. "It is a long ride to the cabin and the way is rough in places. We can stop in town first if you need supplies." "I am ready," Victoria said firmly. "Take us home, Vaughn." They rode out of Missoula together, leaving Agnes standing in her doorway with her mouth pressed into a disapproving line. Victoria did not look back. Her eyes were fixed forward, on the mountains that rose in the distance, on the future that awaited her. The journey to Vaughn's cabin took 2 days, with stops to rest and care for Violet. They camped the first night in a sheltered spot beside a clear stream, and Victoria watched as Vaughn built a fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and bacon. He handled the baby with surprising competence whenever Victoria needed both hands, and he sang to Violet in Norwegian, old lullabies his mother had sung to him, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "You are good with her," Victoria said, watching him rock the baby in his arms while she ate her dinner. "She is easy to love," Vaughn said simply, "as is her mother." Victoria felt warmth bloom in her chest. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "I think I started loving you that first night in Caldwell, when you gave a stranger your room and asked for nothing in return." Vaughn looked up from Violet's sleeping face to meet Victoria's eyes. "I love you too," he said. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing in the snow, so brave and so lost. I knew then that I wanted to protect you, to care for you. I just did not dare to hope you might feel the same way." "I do," Victoria whispered. "I feel exactly the same way." That night, with Violet sleeping peacefully in her basket and the fire crackling nearby, Vaughn and Victoria sat close together under the stars, talking about their future. They would marry as soon as possible, Vaughn said, in the small church in the nearest town. He wanted to make everything proper, to give Violet a legitimate family even if the law would not recognize her as his biological daughter. "She will be mine in every way that matters," he said fiercely. "I will love her and raise her and protect her with everything I have. She will never doubt that she is wanted and cherished." Victoria leaned her head against his broad shoulder, feeling safe and content for the first time in over a year. "She is lucky to have you as her father." "I am the lucky one," Vaughn said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I get a family, a wife and a daughter. I never thought I would have such things." They reached the cabin late the following afternoon, and Victoria's first sight of it took her breath away. It was larger than she had expected, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with the mountains rising majestically behind it. A small barn stood nearby, along with a shed for storing wood and supplies. "It is beautiful," Victoria breathed as Vaughn helped her down from the mare. "Vaughn, it is absolutely beautiful." He looked pleased by her reaction. "Come inside. I have been working all winter to make it comfortable for you and the baby." The interior of the cabin was just as impressive as the exterior. The main room was large and warm, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a proper iron stove for cooking. There was a sturdy table with chairs, shelves lined with books and supplies, and rugs on the wooden floor. A door led to a separate bedroom where Vaughn had built a large bed, and to Victoria's delight, a small cradle carved from smooth pine. "You made this?" she asked, running her hand over the cradle's curved edge. "I wanted Violet to have somewhere safe to sleep," Vaughn said, looking almost shy. "I have never built a cradle before, but I tried to make it sturdy." Victoria turned to him, tears streaming down her face, and pulled him into a fierce hug. "It is perfect. Everything is perfect. I cannot believe you did all this for us." "I would do anything for you," Vaughn said simply. "Both of you." They settled into life in the cabin with surprising ease. Vaughn proved to be a patient teacher, showing Victoria how to manage the various tasks required for mountain living. He taught her how to bank the fire properly at night, how to read the signs of changing weather, how to identify edible plants that grew in the forest. Victoria, in turn, brought order and comfort to the cabin, cooking proper meals and mending Vaughn's worn clothes and filling the space with laughter and conversation. 2 weeks after their arrival, they rode together to the nearest town, a small settlement called Silver Creek, about half a day's journey from the cabin. There, in a simple ceremony at the Methodist church, they were married by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. The only witnesses were the preacher's wife and the town blacksmith, but Victoria felt no less married than if they had been surrounded by hundreds of guests. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Vaughn kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak, and Violet, nestled in Victoria's arms, made a happy gurgling sound as if in approval. "Welcome to the family, Violet Voss," Vaughn whispered, kissing the baby's forehead. "You are officially my daughter now." That night, back at the cabin, Vaughn carried Victoria over the threshold while she laughed and protested that she was too heavy. He set her down gently in front of the fireplace and pulled her close, his hands spanning her waist. "I have wanted to hold you like this for months," he murmured against her hair. "My wife, mine to protect and cherish." "And you are mine," Victoria said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "My husband, my partner, my love." They made love for the first time that night, with Violet sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby. Vaughn was gentle and patient, careful of Victoria's still healing body, and he worshipped her with his hands and mouth until she was gasping his name. When he finally joined their bodies, moving inside her with slow, deep strokes, Victoria felt complete in a way she never had before. This was what love was supposed to feel like, she realized. Not the desperate, anxious need she had felt with Violet's father, but this deep sense of rightness, of two souls finding their perfect match. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Vaughn's large hand resting protectively on Victoria's hip, and talked late into the night. They spoke of their hopes for the future, of the life they would build together. Vaughn wanted to teach Violet to ride as soon as she was old enough, to show her the mountains and forests he loved. Victoria wanted to start a small garden in the spring, growing vegetables and herbs, and perhaps someday open a small school for the children of other trappers and settlers in the area. "We will need more children too," Vaughn said, his hand moving to rest on Victoria's flat belly. "Brothers and sisters for Violet. I want to fill this cabin with family." "I would like that," Victoria whispered, imagining children with Vaughn's pale blue eyes and her dark hair, running through the clearing and climbing the trees. "I would like that very much." The months that followed were the happiest of Victoria's life. She threw herself into learning everything Vaughn could teach her about mountain living, and proved to be an apt student. She learned to shoot a rifle, ostensibly for protection against the occasional bear or mountain lion that wandered near the cabin. She learned to preserve food for the winter, drying meat and smoking fish and putting up jars of vegetables and fruit. She learned to track animals through the forest, reading their signs in the snow and mud. Violet thrived in the mountain air, growing plump and rosy-cheeked. She was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh, and she clearly adored Vaughn, reaching for him whenever he came near and babbling contentedly when he held her. Vaughn, for his part, was a devoted father, spending hours playing with Violet and talking to her in Norwegian, teaching her words she was still too young to understand. By the time winter arrived again, Victoria was pregnant with their second child. This time, there was no fear or shame, only joy and anticipation. Vaughn fussed over her constantly, trying to keep her from doing any heavy work, until Victoria finally had to insist that she was perfectly healthy and capable of managing her normal tasks. "I carried Violet while traveling alone across the territory," she reminded him when he tried to convince her to rest instead of helping with the daily chores. "I can certainly manage while living in comfort with a husband who loves me." "Still," Vaughn said stubbornly, "you should take care. Both of you should take care." Victoria softened, seeing the worry in his eyes. "We will be fine," she promised, taking his hand and placing it on her gently swelling belly. "This baby is strong and healthy just like Violet, I can feel it." Their son was born on a snowy December morning, coming into the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin. Vaughn, who had ridden through a blizzard to fetch Mrs. Henderson from Silver Creek, paced anxiously outside the bedroom door until the midwife finally called him in to meet his child. "You have a son," Victoria said, exhausted but beaming as she held the tiny, red-faced infant. "A big, strong son." Vaughn approached the bed slowly, reverently, and looked down at the baby with wonder in his eyes. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Just perfect." They named him Victor after Victoria, and he proved to have inherited his father's size and strength. From the beginning, he was a vigorous baby, nursing enthusiastically and growing at an alarming rate. Violet, now a toddler with dark curls and curious eyes, was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to help with everything from feeding to changing. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work and deep contentment. Victoria gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter they named Vera, and another son called Vincent. The cabin that had once seemed so large began to feel comfortably full, with children's laughter ringing off the walls and small toys scattered across the floor. Vaughn expanded the cabin twice, building additional rooms to accommodate their growing family. He taught the older children to trap and hunt, to read the forest and respect the mountains. Victoria started her small school, teaching not only her own children but also the few other families who had settled in the area. She used the skills she had honed as a schoolteacher back in Denver, and found deep satisfaction in watching young minds blossom under her instruction. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vaughn surprised Victoria by taking her on a journey back to Caldwell, the town where they had first met. They left the children with Mrs. Henderson and rode together through the mountain passes, arriving in the familiar small town on a warm summer afternoon. The hotel was still there, though under new management, and the proprietor who had turned Victoria away all those years ago had long since moved on. Vaughn booked them a room, not out of necessity but out of nostalgia, and they spent the evening walking through the town and reminiscing about that fateful winter storm. "I cannot believe it has been 10 years, Victoria said as they stood on the very spot where Vaughn had first approached her. "It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "You were so brave," Vaughn said, pulling her close. "Standing in the snow, refusing to give up even when that fool turned you away. I knew immediately that you were someone special." "And you were my salvation," Victoria said, leaning into his embrace. "My mountain man who gave me not just a room but a whole new life. I was lost, Vaughn, and you found me." "We found each other," Vaughn corrected gently, "and we built something beautiful together." That night, in the hotel room that Vaughn had given to her so long ago, they made love with the passion and tenderness of a couple who knew each other completely. Victoria traced the scars on Vaughn's body, the marks left by 10 years of hard mountain living, and marveled at how this strong, gentle man had chosen her, had loved her unconditionally from the very beginning. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," she whispered against his chest. "However long that may be." "Then that is what we will do," Vaughn said, his arms tightening around her. "We will grow old together in our mountain home, surrounded by our children and, God willing, their children. We will build a legacy of love and strength." They returned to the cabin renewed and recommitted to the life they had built. The children greeted them with hugs and stories about everything that had happened in their absence. And that night, with all 4 children tucked into their beds, Vaughn and Victoria sat on the porch of their cabin and watched the stars emerge overhead. "Are you happy?" Vaughn asked, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "More than I ever thought possible," Victoria answered honestly. "There were days back when I was traveling to Missoula when I thought my life was over. I thought I had made mistakes that could never be forgiven or forgotten. But you showed me that the past does not have to define the future. You gave me a second chance, Vaughn. You gave me everything." "You gave me more," Vaughn said. "Before you, I was content with my solitary life, but I did not know what I was missing. You brought warmth and light into my world. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond mere survival. You made me whole." They sat in companionable silence for a long while, listening to the sounds of the forest settling down for the night. An owl hooted somewhere in the trees, and the wind whispered through the pines. Inside the cabin, one of the children stirred and called out, and Victoria started to rise, but Vaughn gently pressed her back into her chair. "I will go," he said, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "You rest." Victoria watched him disappear into the cabin, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, and felt a rush of love so fierce it took her breath away. This life, this family, this home they had built together in the mountains was everything she had ever wanted, and so much more than she had dared to dream. As the years continued to pass, the Voss family became a fixture in the small community of mountain settlers. Vaughn's reputation as a fair and honest man grew, and people began coming to him to settle disputes or ask for advice. Victoria's school expanded, and she found herself teaching not just basic reading and arithmetic, but also music and literature, sharing her love of learning with a new generation. Violet grew into a beautiful young woman, strong and capable, with her mother's dark hair and her father's pale blue eyes. She could shoot as well as any man, ride like the wind, and recite Shakespeare from memory. Young men from miles around began finding excuses to visit the Voss cabin, but Violet was in no hurry to marry. She wanted to see the world beyond the mountains first, she told her parents, and perhaps become a teacher like her mother. Victor became his father's right hand, learning the trapping trade and proving to have an almost uncanny ability to read the forest. By the time he was 16, he was bringing in as many pelts as Vaughn, and the two of them worked together in an easy partnership that filled Victoria with pride. Vera was the family artist, always drawing or painting, capturing the beauty of the mountains in charcoal and watercolors. Vincent, the youngest, was the family clown, always ready with a joke or a story to make everyone laugh. On Victoria's 40th birthday, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Vaughn had built a large table outside so they could eat under the stars, and Victoria looked around at her children, now mostly grown, and felt such profound gratitude that tears welled up in her eyes. "What is wrong, Mama?" Violet asked, noticing the tears. "Nothing is wrong," Victoria said, wiping her eyes. "I am just happy, so incredibly, overwhelmingly happy." Vaughn, seated beside her, took her hand and raised it to his lips. "As am I," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers with all the love and devotion of their 20 years together. That night, after the children had gone to bed and the dishes were cleaned, Victoria and Vaughn walked through the forest together, following a path they had walked hundreds of times before. The moon was full overhead, painting the world in silver light, and Victoria felt the peace of the mountains settle into her bones. "You ever regret it?" she asked Vaughn as they paused beside a small stream. "Giving up your solitary life for a wife and children and all the noise and chaos that comes with them." Vaughn pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her from behind, and rested his chin on top of her head. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. My life before you was empty, Victoria. I did not realize how empty until you filled it with love and laughter and purpose. You and our children are the best thing that ever happened to me." Victoria turned in his arms to face him, rising on her toes to kiss him. "And you are mine," she whispered against his lips. "My mountain man, my protector, my love." They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other close, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life beyond their wildest dreams. The stream burbled beside them. The wind whispered through the trees, and overhead the stars shone with eternal light. Years later, when Victoria was in her 60s and Vaughn's dark hair had gone silver, they sat together on the porch of their cabin and watched their grandchildren play in the clearing. Violet had married a surveyor and given them 3 grandchildren. Victor had married a woman from Silver Creek and had 4 children of his own. Vera had become a renowned artist whose paintings hung in galleries as far away as San Francisco, and Vincent had married and taken over the trapping business from his father. "We built something good," Victoria said, her hand resting in Vaughn's as it had for nearly 40 years. "Something that will last beyond us." "We did," Vaughn agreed, his voice still deep and strong despite his years. "A family, a legacy, a love that nothing could diminish." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him even now, and watched as one of their grandsons, a boy with Vaughn's blue eyes, climbed a tree with fearless determination. "I never could have imagined this," she said softly. "That night in Caldwell, when I was standing in the snow with nowhere to go, I never could have imagined that my life would turn out so beautifully." "I could," Vaughn said, and when Victoria looked up at him in surprise, he smiled. "The moment I saw you, standing there so brave and so lost, I knew you were meant to be part of my life. I did not know how or in what way, but I knew it with absolute certainty. You were my destiny, Victoria. You always were." Tears filled Victoria's eyes, but they were happy tears, the tears of a woman who had found her place in the world and made it her own. She thought back to that frightened, pregnant girl who had been turned away from a hotel on a winter night, and marveled at how far she had come. That girl had been broken and ashamed, believing her life was over before it had truly begun. But she had survived, had persevered, had found love and built a family and created a home filled with warmth and laughter. "I love you," she whispered to Vaughn, the words as true and deep as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I will love you until my last breath. And I will love you beyond that," Vaughn said, pulling her closer. "In this life and whatever comes after." They sat together as the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The children's laughter rang through the clearing, and smoke rose from the cabin chimney, and Victoria felt a peace so profound it seemed to fill her entire being. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not a perfect life free from struggle or sorrow, but a life built on love and commitment and the daily choice to honor the promises made. It was a life filled with children and grandchildren, with work and joy and the simple pleasures of home. It was a life she shared with a man who had seen her at her lowest point and offered not judgment but kindness, not pity but partnership. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge overhead, Vaughn and Victoria finally rose from their porch chairs and went inside. The cabin was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of fresh bread and pine smoke. Their children and grandchildren filled the rooms with noise and laughter, and Victoria moved among them, hugging and talking and simply being present in the moment. Later, when everyone had finally settled down for the night, Victoria and Vaughn lay together in the bed he had built with his own hands all those years ago. Vaughn's arms wrapped around her, holding her close, and Victoria felt the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Vaughn asked, his voice sleepy and content. "For seeing me when I was invisible, for offering help when I desperately needed it, for loving me when I felt unlovable, for building this life with me." Vaughn's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for accepting that help, for trusting me when you had no reason to, for choosing me, for loving me, for making me a father and a husband and showing me what it means to truly live." They fell asleep holding each other, two souls perfectly matched, two hearts beating as one. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The cabin stood strong and solid, sheltering the family within, a testament to what could be built when love and determination worked together. Years would continue to pass, seasons would change, and eventually both Vaughn and Victoria would return to the earth that had sustained them. But the legacy they built would endure in their children and grandchildren, in the stories told around winter fires, in the cabin that still stood strong in its mountain clearing. They had taken a moment of desperation and transformed it into a lifetime of love. They had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful and lasting. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness on a snowy winter night, when a mountain man gave a desperate woman his room and asked for nothing in return. That single gesture had changed two lives, had created a family, had woven a love story that would be remembered for generations. It proved that sometimes the most profound changes come from the smallest acts of compassion, and that true love can blossom even in the most unlikely circumstances. In the end, that was the greatest gift Vaughn and Victoria gave to each other and to the world. Proof that kindness matters, that second chances are real, and that love, when freely given and gratefully received, can transform everything.